Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen and today I'm back with another International Booker review, and today's pick is the shortlisted title Kairos by Jenny Erpenbeck. Now this is a book that I have been meaning to get to for a while. As a matter of fact, this was on my TBR last year for Women in Translation Month, and sadly it was one that I never ended up getting around to. So when it was longlisted for the International Booker, I was so excited because it was a great reminder for me that I wanted to get to this book, and I'm so glad because this is a really solid book and I am really glad that I ended up reading it. Now, this book takes place in the late 80s and it takes place primarily in East Germany, East Berlin to be specific, and I will say that it also does have moments where the character does leave East Germany and travel into West Germany, which is really important to the story because we're talking about a time in history where there is a lot of events that are unfolding, and basically we are coming to the decline or the collapse of the German Democratic Republic, or the GDR, and that is the backdrop of this book. So we have characters that are living their lives and it's all amongst this huge political turmoil that is going on in the background. And it's a really great juxtaposition with what is going on in the personal and private lives of our two main characters. So we have Katerina, who is 19, and she is a student, and she is very much at the start of the book almost like innocent and pie in the sky and looking for what her life is going to end up being, and she's really looking to get herself out there and start to live her life. And then we have a man by the name of Hans, and he is the opposite. So he is in his mid-50s. He is a writer. He has a very established and successful career, and he is married. He has children, and they kind of seem like the opposite sides of the spectrum. And then one day they have a chance encounter on a bus, and the events after that lead to a very passionate, very toxic, very destructive romance between the two that lasts for a significant amount of time. Now, the fact that we have that relationship beginning and then ultimately falling apart with that political backdrop, I just found fascinating. It was a really great tool that the author used just to kind of talk about the tumultuousness that was going on in not only the world in that area at the time, but also how when those things are happening, we all also have our personal crises that are happening at the very same time. So not only is the world around us changing, but our worlds and our lives are changing at the same time. So at the beginning of the relationship, everything, of course, is perfect. Katerina is absolutely smitten and fascinated with Hans, and he can do absolutely no wrong. She is charmed by him. He is that older professorial type, and she is absolutely head over heels for him and is very much influenced by him. And Hans is married, he has children, he has an established career, and he knows the power that he has in the relationship. He knows how fragile and vulnerable and fresh Katerina is with relationships, and it almost seems like he is thriving on that. And it doesn't take very long for us as the reader to start to see the cracks in the relationship and see how toxic and awful this entire situation is. And as the book progresses, I'm not going to get into specific details of events that happen within the relationship or anything like that, but this is not a love story by any sense of the word. Although it involves a love affair and a relationship, this is toxic from the start, and this book is actually very uncomfortable to read. This was another one of those books where, as I was reading it, I felt extremely claustrophobic. I felt extremely uncomfortable. I was angry and irate and shaking my head and screaming at Katerina to come to her senses and walk away from this man. It was an abusive relationship, and it was, like I said, extremely difficult to read. And Jenny Erpenbeck, she did such an amazing job of creating this realistic situation and making us kind of that fly on the wall watching this tumultuous relationship just implode and then build itself back up just to turn around the next day and implode again. And that's just such a relatable human response to being in a relationship. And I think that she did an amazing job of outlining that. And there were so many moments in this book where I had to stop because it was just getting to be too much to handle. The way that Hans controlled Katerina, the way that he treated her, the way that he was hypocritical of her for doing the same things that he was doing, and when she did it, she was a monster, but when he did it, he was a martyr. Ugh, and this book just toyed with all of those emotions. And I was just so fascinated as a reader to be watching all of this happen. And also keeping in mind that as all of this is happening, as we have the good, happy times, and now we're at the point where everything is starting or building up to this final crescendo, ultimately just to start collapsing, you have to know that that's all happening in tandem with that political event of the ultimate collapse and final bringing down the wall in the GDR, and ultimately to that point of reunification. And I just thought that this was masterfully done. The writing was gorgeous and the translation was gorgeous as well. I just enjoyed this book so much. Even though it made me uncomfortable, even though it was not the most pleasant read, it was just a great story, and Erpenbeck and Michael Hoffman as a translator were able to get me absorbed in that story, and I felt for Katerina, and the feelings that I had throughout this book were visceral, and I was angry, and the writing was impacting me, and I was feeling, like I said, that claustrophobia, that feeling of drowning, and that need to escape and run and get as far away from Hans as possible. And as this was happening, obviously it was happening to a character in a book, but I was still feeling that anxiety, and that just goes to show how well this book was written. And after I read a book that I have such strong feelings about, I'll usually go digging for additional information about the book, and one of the things I found while doing that with this one is how much praise Michael Hoffman received as a translator. There were so many instances where they talked about how beautiful and sharp Erpenbeck's writing is, but Michael Hoffman was able to capture that same magic within the translation as well, which is not an easy thing to do. I know it sounds like it would be something that is a given or obvious, but there are not always words in certain languages that have a translated word into English. So there are so many instances where things do get lost in translation just because the language doesn't exist and the words don't exist. But for Michael Hoffman to be able to do that and carry those same feelings over to the translated piece is really a commendable task. So kudos to Michael Hoffman for that. One other thing I will say about this book that I really enjoyed is it opened with a bang and it ended with one as well. So I don't think that it's a spoiler because it literally happens within the first handful of pages, but we end up learning that this book starts with Katerina's memories. She is in the future and she is looking back on this love affair in this time in her life. And we learn that Hans has died. So it's not a secret, it's not a spoiler. So we open with that very dramatic information, and as we progress and we go back into the past and we hear the story, one thing I was not expecting was to get to the end of this book and there also to be a twist. I would have been perfectly content with this book ending without it. I had that level of satisfaction. I had that level of closure, but the fact that Jenny Erpenbeck took it a step further and gave us, the reader, a plot twist was very interesting. And when I say plot twist, it's nothing that you could probably not ascertain through reading the book. To me, I was not shocked when I heard the plot twist, but I do appreciate the fact that she didn't just leave things as they were and just ended things with the end of the relationship. She also took it that extra step, which just further solidified the fact that I really enjoyed this book. So I'm really curious to hear if any of you out there that have read this book had that same experience that I did, where you were emotionally connected to this book and it brought out those feelings of claustrophobia and anxiety, and whether or not you wanted to just pull Katerina aside and try to talk some sense into her and make her see the light of how awful the situation that she was in actually was. So yeah, I ended up landing on a 4.5 for this book. This is the highest rated book that I have had on the International Booker so far. There are still a few books from the shortlist that I still need to finish, but so far this is the front runner, and this is the book that I've enjoyed the most so far. So that is certainly subject to change, but I am glad though that because I was having such trouble with the International Booker at the beginning, that now as I start to read some of those books that have been shortlisted, I am definitely having a much better time, and I'm starting to better understand how these books would make it to the shortlist. So yeah, there's definitely more content to come from the International Booker, and until we read again, bye.